Okay, I think we'll get started. So we're going to focus our attention now on light as a wave. So we've talked about waves on strings. We've talked about sound waves. Light is interesting in that it does not need a medium. It can propagate through a vacuum. And it took a long time for physicists to accept this. So there were lots of ideas about what that medium might be. But it ultimately became clear that electromagnetic radiation will propagate through empty space, and very interestingly, will do so at a constant speed called the speed of light, regardless of the frequency of the oscillation. So we have a constant speed of light of 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. Light follows then this formula that we've seen before with the velocity for c. And what's incredibly remarkable about this is that this is accurate over 26 orders of magnitude. That would be like in chemistry, having the ability to talk about one molecule, scale it up well beyond Avogadro's number, say to the ocean, and have a connecting theory that goes all the way down between those two. So it's really quite amazing and incredibly simple. So this is always true for any frequency. And so the electromagnetic radiation, often called light just generically, even if it's not the visible light that we're used to. If you hear light, if you hear electromagnetic radiation, that's the same. We talk about the electromagnetic spectrum. Very important region for us is where the wavelength is about 700 to 400 nanometers. So wavelength is going to increase this way. Energy and frequency, because we haven't talked about energy yet, but frequency is inversely proportional. And I'm just telling you now that energy scales with frequency, not wavelength. So energy and frequency are over here. So high energy light is over here, low energy light is over here. Smack dab in the middle here is visible light. So we've evolved to have the proteins in our eyes pick up light of these wavelengths and only these wavelengths. But that doesn't mean there's not light of all other colors there. If we go to the higher energy side or the lower wavelength side, so wavelengths lower, shorter than 400 nanometers, we get into the ultraviolet, the X-ray, and the gamma ray radiation. And we know that you shouldn't have too many X-rays, and the reason for that is X-rays are very high energy. These are on the order of these are short enough so that they can see on the order of the nuclei of the placement of the nuclei of elements, and so they're very good at picking out differences in types of material. And so we've used it, of course, in medicine to pick out the difference between high density tissues like bone versus low density tissue like muscle and connective tissue. Then if we go to the lower frequency side, we get to the infrared. And so you've probably seen like thermal cameras where you can pick up the radiation given off by objects that are higher in temperature than their surroundings. They kind of show up on these thermal cameras. That's the IR. Then we get into the microwave and down into the radio wave. And this goes down to very, very long wavelengths, kilometers, really indefinitely, and then to very, very, very short wavelengths. So again, 26 orders of magnitude through this whole spectrum. All right. What about in a transparent material? So this is propagating through empty space, but we know light can come through the glass. We're inside the house. It's not like it's completely dark in here because sunlight can't get in. Light can go through transparent materials. And when it does so, it slows down. And it slows down because the light, and we'll talk about this more, light has an electric field component to it, which interacts with particularly the electrons in these transparent materials. And as it tries to slosh around these electrons, that slows down the light. And it does so by a unitless number called the index of refraction. And so we see the speed of light in material is c divided by the index of refraction. Now in air, there's so few, the density of molecules is very small. So there's a large gap of nothingness between two gas molecules. So by and large, air is just like a vacuum. The speed of light is, or the index of refraction is 1.000 something. So if to a couple of sig figs, the index of refraction is 1, so speed of light in air is just speed of light in the vacuum. So we'll always take the speed of light in air to be a vacuum. Now, that is definitely not the case in materials where the molecules are right next to each other. Then we have a lot of electrons very close to each other, and they're being sloshed around by this light. In common liquids, water, for example, the index of refraction is often about 1.3. For glasses, that can be a little bit higher, and so 1.5. The book will have a table of various index of refraction. So if you're doing a problem and it looks like you need the index of refraction for something, it's probably expecting that you find that table in the book. Okay, let's use one example. Let's take 532 nanometer light. This is green colored light, and we'll pass it through a piece of glass that will take as the index of refraction of 1.5. So let's calculate everything we need here now. Then we're going to say that the air is vacuum. So let's get the vacuum speed, or the air speed, or frequency, sorry. Because we're in the vacuum, our speed is the speed of light. And so we can use our formula from over here to get the frequency. Now, let's get the frequency in the material. Now, this is interesting. I should have mentioned this down here. The frequency in the material is equal to the frequency in the vacuum. And one way to kind of think about that, imagine you're just inside this piece of glass and the light wave is coming by and it's going into the glass. Well, you're going to be seeing that light wave move up and down at the same frequency. Now the speed slows down, so that means it doesn't travel as far as it goes into material. So its wavelength shortens considerably. So depending on the index of refraction. So we always lock this in. I think this is easy to forget. So we only need to know the vacuum information to get the frequency of the material. Then we can say then that because the frequency of the material is the same, but it's actually going slower, then the wavelength is going to be less, and it's going to be less by an amount equal to the vacuum wavelength divided by the index of refraction. So we take 532 divided by 1.5, and we get 355 nanometers. And finally, we can get the velocity. The velocity is just the speed of light divided by the index of refraction. So we can get that. So we can use these. We can calculate these in any order, of course. So you could have done this in a different flow there. Okay. Now let's look at what happens when light passes through a slit. So let's imagine this light coming from, say, the sun, so long distance away. The wave is basically like a wave in the ocean, perfectly kind of linear across this front. Now it hits this wall with a small hole in it. That small hole will allow water to pass. If it's water, in this case, it'll allow light to pass, but only through the slit. And so this will act like a source, a point source of the wave. And so this is true for water wave, sound wave, light wave. And so this will create what are called little wavelets, which are going to propagate out in semicircle form. So it's as if you've got a little source of wave, like you plunk a stone into the lake, it's going to expand out in a circular pattern. Well, we've got a wall there, so we're blocking that, so we'll just get a semicircular pattern. Okay, well, So that changes what's called the wave fronts here. They're not linearly coming in, they're semicircles now. So now let's send this into something that has two slits. And when we do that, we get two sources of these wavelets, and they're offset from one another. So if I were to sit out here in, say, the lake or the ocean, or for this case, the light, I would see regions where I have constructive interference right here. And then I would have regions right here where I have a peak of my, if these are all representing peaks, I have a peak right between two peaks, so that's a trough. So here, the waves would exactly cancel. So we'll get constructive interference here, destructive interference here. And so as you might imagine, if we plunk two stones into the lake, we don't get a clean circular pattern. We get a mess of patterns as these circles interact with each other. Well, now here it's the semicircles that are overlapping, and by the principle of superposition, causing destructive and constructive interference. Now, let's imagine we're standing here at the shore with the water, or this is light. So we're not out in the lake here. We're just looking at the shore, and we're seeing where the waves are coming in. And there's going to be points where they're right exactly here. We can imagine like crossing. These are just going to keep propagating outward, and we cross right here. We're going to get a situation where we have high constructive interference, so we get big amplitude swings, and then places where we have low amplitude swings, and in fact nodes where there will be positions on the shore where there's no wave at all, right at one spot on either side. Then there'll be higher waves, and this will produce an interference pattern where we have high antinodes, node, antinode, node, but because these are sort of spreading out, that the energy has to be dissipated a bit, and so we are losing amplitude as we go out. So we have the most amplitude in the position closest and less amplitude as we go down. So if we were to plot the intensity or the amplitude of these waves along this shore, we would get a peak at each of these points, but the peaks would be decreasing with distance that we walk away from that central point. We label these peaks here as the 0th peak, and then 1 is the first peak on either side of that, and 2 is the second peak on either side of that. And so that's how we refer to these. Well, let's look at the geometry. We're not going to go through this in great detail. The book does a bit, but let's just kind of set up the geometry. It's a bit confusing because we can't draw this to scale, really. What we're talking about here is we need these slits to be very close to one another. So the distance between the openings, little d, has to be much smaller than the distance from the slits to the wall. So this might be meter or so. This has to be millimeter or less distance between these. And what we can see here is if we run from this point to a point here and this point to a point here, those will be where the little sources of wavelets have propagated these distances. And notice they're almost the same distance, but not quite. R1 in this case is a little shorter than R2. If R1 is shorter than R2 by 1 full wavelength, then they add together. If they're shorter by half a wavelength, then they destructively interfere and completely cancel. So let's look as we go from here, right? This distance would be exactly the same. The two waves would be exactly on top of each other. There's no difference in distance. So they would constructively interfere and give us our 0th peak. There's no difference in distance. Now, as I move this way, I'll reach a point where they're half a wavelength apart, and that's going to be right here. So if they're half a wavelength apart, then the peak of one and the trough of the other are on top of each other, and they cancel completely. And then if I walk a little further, I'll come back to where we're differ by one full wavelength, and we regain some, but not all of the amplitude. We have less amplitude because we're getting further and further away from the source here. Okay, well, so what we want to know is, where are these peaks? And where are they relative to the wavelength of the light that's coming in? So we're going to kind of cut to the chase here, and I'm just going to give you the formulas. You can kind of work out some of the geometry, although it is confusing because we don't have like a single triangle here we're talking about. We have to be thinking about limiting cases here. But if we cast sort of this angle here, so imagine we're looking at back at the slit, and we're walking along the beach, and we're looking back at this angle. The position, how far we have to walk, say to get from 0 to 1, so from y equals 0 to y equals 1, is going to be, well, it's going to depend on L. If this is a longer length, then it sort of leverages that spread of these, so we'd have to walk a little bit longer. So we'd expect this to depend on L. And then the tangent of this angle, well, what is this angle? This angle is going to be the arc sine of whatever m we're looking for, say m1, wavelength divided by d. Okay, so I'm just telling you this. The book will go through this a little bit more carefully if you want to look at that. Now we can just plug this into here. I guess this should be m there. We can plug this into here, and we have our formula that we're going to use. There are places where this simplifies. If you know that the wavelength of the light is very small compared to d, not L, but d, so d is already small, but if the wavelengths usually are much smaller than d itself, then we can approximate this with this. Many of the problems, some of the problems that will work, many of the problems you need the full formula here. So I would get used to working with that full formula. Okay, so this is how the two-slit behavior behaves. And so I wouldn't get too hung up on the math. We've kind of talked about the equations here. What you really want to do in this case is get the story down, the concepts down of why this is working. It connects a lot of the ideas that we've been talking about. So think about that in the context of superposition, really be able to explain why we see this. Then just the formula is what it is, and you can use that accordingly. But you'll end up getting lost, I think, if you don't have a good, solid conceptual understanding of why these are appearing here. Why do we get a pattern that looks like this? All right, that's it for today.